You're listening to Leadership Powered by Common Sense with your host, Doug Thorpe. Here's Doug.
Hello again, everyone. This is Doug Thorpe, and you're listening to another episode of Leadership Powered by Common Sense. Today, we're going to take a look at the Amazon way, and more importantly, things that you can do to really be bold in your own leadership. My guest is a gentleman named John Rossman. John, welcome to the show.
Doug, thanks for having me on Leadership Powered by Common Sense. We're too short of that, so great to be here.
Amen. So first, John, if I may, give everybody the short synopsis of kind of your journey and background.
Yeah, so I'm an engineer by background. I was a partner at Arthur Andersen. I got recruited by Amazon in the early 2000s to come launch a business. That business was the marketplace business. So the marketplace is third party selling at Amazon.com. Today, that's about 60% of all units shipped and sold at Amazon. I ran another business at Amazon called Enterprise Services. I left Amazon in 2005. I was a partner at a firm called Alvarez & Marcel for 12 years. And along the way, interestingly enough, the Gates Foundation was my biggest client. And I had a client there who pulled me aside one day and said, John, you do a nice job of taking the mindset and the strategies from Amazon and delicately inserting them into our business. I think you ought to write a book about it. And so I talked him into being my partner on these books. So released a book called The Amazon Way in 2014, done 3 editions of that. That's really my story at Amazon and about the leadership principles. I then wrote a complementary book called Think Like Amazon, 50 and a half Ideas to Become a Digital Leader. That's like the full playbook from Amazon. But along the way here, I've been doing client work the whole time. I was the senior technology advisor at the Gates Foundation. I was a senior innovation advisor for T-Mobile for 3 years. And what I came to was a thesis around leadership that's needed for when we are not doing incremental types of initiatives, but an actual major transformation. So these things get called lots of things: a growth strategy, a market repositioning, a digital transformation, a cost model, or an operating model change, right? But what all of these things are is they're a big bet, right? They're big in that we have big potential upside, but they're a bet in that they have lots of risks, dependencies, unknown unknowns. And so my co-author, Kevin McCaffrey, who was my client at T-Mobile, so Kevin ran new business incubation at T-Mobile, what we came to was a thesis around what does it take for senior leadership to do a different type of job, and that job is to lead these major transformations. So we just released a book called Big Bet Leadership, Your Transformation Playbook for Winning in the Hyper-Digital Era, and it is a tactical set of principles, strategies, and tactics for senior leaders to do this job, which is help actually make significant non-incremental moves in their business.
I love it. And you packed a lot in there, especially about the big bet and everything. And let me talk about that first. As most of my listeners know, I have a little bit of a bifurcated coaching and advisory practice. I do a lot of work in the corporate level, Fortune 500 type clients, but I also do a lot of work in mid-market, small business, privately held. And in both cases, really, leadership is leadership. And that's the wonderful and beauty of it. But often that's hard for people to understand. But back to your point, the thesis for Big Bet, I think that's often the sticking point where leaders, even in the big companies, are shown an opportunity, or maybe their market intelligence tells them something, or however they get inspired for this idea, it feels too big, and they sort of pause or get stuck trying to move the idea forwards. And so let's start talking about that aspect of kind of the mental block in accepting the big bet.
Yeah. So, there's lots of ways to come to the notion of okay, a significant addition or change is needed, right? It's not always a change. It's sometimes an addition, a new market, a new product, a new customer base, a new use case, and everything. But you feel this because of both opportunities you're seeing in the market, but you can also feel it from a competitive sense of like, you know, our customers don't just love us. We're losing more deals than we used to lose. Our margins are being compressed. Our churn is increasing. Our customer acquisition costs are increasing. Like those are all signs like, you need to create a differentiation. That's a big bet. And the fundamental, difference of these things is lots of types of investments or initiatives. You know that if you and execute well, you're going to get a certain type of return on that, right? That might be I hire a new salesperson, or I build a new fulfillment center, or I launch a new incremental project. You've got pretty good understanding of the risk reward payoff. Whereas a big bet, a digital transformation, a new growth strategy, a new market entry strategy, those have a lot more potential upside, but they have lots more of unknown unknowns and risks and dependencies on others. So the fundamental thing that you have to recognize is we need to go about these in a much more experiment-driven, agile approach. But that's not what happens, right? What tends to happen is we have a vague notion of like, here's the problem we're solving for our customer or for our business that we're solving. We have an even vaguer notion, a fuzzy notion of like, well, what's the future like? What's the killer feature that's really going to solve it? And then because we don't understand those things, well, then it's a real circuitous path that we're undertaking. That's where the failure rate on these types of transformations really skyrocket, is because we don't have this fundamental understanding. So in big bet leadership, leveraging the techniques of Amazon, which is about memo writing, writing and debating, essentially doing thought experiments early on to get a really firm notion of this is the real problem and a real root cause understanding of what the problem is. And here's our hypothesis about, well, what's the future really going to look like? Well, when you have those things, we call it a big bet vector. Then you can go about testing that vector in a much more effective and low risk manner than this fuzzy notion of transformation or growth strategy. So that's where that's the beginning of the book, and that's where we believe that these transformational leaders that we worked for, Elon Musk, Jeff Bezos, John Ledger from T-Mobile, they do three things differently than really good operational leaders. They create clarity. So they do not suffer from vague notions of a project or a transformation. They maintain velocity. Most corporations, they start off with great vigor on these types of initiatives, but then they quickly become just another thing to do. Big bet legends do not do that. They maintain velocity. And the third thing they do, and this is the hardest one to kind of come around to, which is they accelerate risk and value testing, deferring big commitments until you've actually de-risked the major conceptual concepts that are involved here, right? And so you have to kind of flip the script of how you approach things. You have to recognize, well, what are the things that would have to be true for this big idea to happen? And then how do I create an experiment log to test them and have the discipline to defer big commitments, understand, use the right language of like, hey, I'm testing this. This is a concept. This is a bet. This isn't a commitment. Those are the beginnings of the playbook to win at these types of non-incremental transformations and growth initiatives. That whether you're a small, mid-sized company with a proven business model or a mid-sized, large company, everybody needs to have non-incremental concepts that they are testing in the business, which gets to the preface of the book. So the subtitle of the book is Your Transformation Playbook for Winning in the Hyperdigital Era. The preface of the book is about, well, what's the hyperdigital era? Yeah. So my thesis is that the past 25 years of digital transformation, a lot of change has happened, right? A lot of new big winners, a lot of new of established brands losing out. There's been a lot of change. The next 25 years will make that pale in comparison. And it's not just because of technology, it's because of a couple of other mega forces that are going to drive our country and our environment and our business ecosystem to have a whole new set of winners and losers and a whole new set of dramatic change that's coming. And so we have to develop as a core competency in senior leadership, how do we actually run these types of high potential, high risk initiatives? And that's what big bet leadership gives a leader, is a playbook to do their job when a major transformation is needed.
Wow. Well, you packed a lot in there, and a couple of things I want to highlight that I've known about or been told about. One is a concept, and this may be it might not have been the literal term used, but it's the way it's been translated by others in the market at Amazon, a principle of failing fast. And
yeah, so let me work that a little bit. So Amazon does not use the term failing fast, right?
I thought not.
And failure, when I work with my clients on kind of innovation projects or these types of things, like failure is an overloaded term. It means both testing and getting the results of the test. So that's the scientific process of experimentation. But it also means, and is used as an excuse for sloppiness and not being good at executing, which is never the sense. And too many of these innovation programs, they get defined by this sloppiness. And so, like, let's not use the word, let's use testing or experimentation or bets. I like the term bet because a bet says, I think it's a good idea, but I don't know for sure, so I need to test it out, right? Versus a project or an initiative. An initiative is something like, if we execute well, we should succeed. So separate the language. Don't use that term. So Amazon does not use that term of failing fast, but it's a general concept, especially within kind of the West Coast, the left coast that I live on, and everything, of like being agile. But it's a complex term to use, and it's too often used for allowing kind of sloppiness within organizations to develop. So experimentation, hypothesis driven, testing quickly, agile mindset and methodologies. Amen. Absolutely. All day long. Failure, complex term to introduce into an organization. So I would recommend that you don't.
Well, thank you. That's exactly where I was going, because that has always been my supposition when I've heard anybody give me that term. Because again, just in a principle of business, embracing a failure. I mean, things do fail. Initiatives do fail. Even after the launch, you've done all the prep work and you launch and it's a failure. But the wise leader tries to learn from it. And to your point, what I'm hearing is in the ramp up to it, you want to do that testing and experimentation as best you can for the premises or thoughts you believe to be true. You test them, and if the answer is no, that's not true, okay, go to the next one and determine what it is. And yeah, I agree. And this maybe is mincing words, but it's not really a failure if you're learning that way.
If your job is to run an experiment, well, you have to let the experiment do what it's designed to do, which is either succeed, have positive results, or fail, have negative results. But that's, again, very different than we were kind of undisciplined, unclear, sloppy, we didn't execute well. And that's what, when you're doing a postmortem of, a situation, you have to understand, well, was it an experiment and did we do it right? What did we learn? Or was it poor execution by the team? That's a real fine line of kind of like, okay, like, was this a learning or was this truly like poor execution? And again, in my experience, and I've worked with a lot of corporates on their innovation programs, I always joke that agile has become the methodology of no accountability, right? No scope, no budget, no committed time frame. We're agile. And that's all too often what happens in companies is they use these principles to to just, we call them in big bet leadership, we call them kind of drugstore cowboys, right? All hat, no cattle. You probably appreciate the type and everything. It's like these teams look like they're trying to do something, but if you really pressure test into them of like, well, what are you doing? What's your thesis for this? How are you running these things? Is there a sense of urgency within the team? Are we using our resources like they're our own and being a good steward of our resources? They fail on all of those things,
Yeah.
right? And so they're just kind of looking busy versus really working to do their job, which is, hey, we got to build the next business here for our current business, and the urgency level in these transformation or innovation teams or new business incubation teams, like you got to ratchet it up pretty hard.
Yeah. Well, the other element that comes to mind, and I've done a lot of work on the corporate side of my own coaching, where I've been inserted in businesses where they want to make change. They're doing these big, brand transformation or even digital transformation, as you said, one of the popular buzzwords. But as opportunities arise that are, for all indicators, clear opportunity in the market. Let's go to this region, or let's go to this continent, and let's, have an initiatives, set up shop. There's a propensity in the older, longer legacy type companies in the Fortune 500 to overanalyze. They get the classic paralysis by analysis. And so part of the transformation that they are trying to invoke is the notion that let's get away from the 100% certainty model, because we can get to 70% of our data that gives us the indicators, the testing and the evaluating, all of that. We can get to about a 70% confidence that it's a go or no go. But that other 30% of fact finding and testing takes eons to work through. And by the time you get that done and hit your perceived 100% mark of accuracy, the opportunity's gone. The market's moved on.
Completely agree. We've got a number of anecdotes for that type of the analysis for paralysis. All of the recommended actions that we do, it's always this combination of like, how do you think harder, faster, deeper about it, but do it with a constraint, typically around time or attention or full-time focus on it and everything, right? Because drag becomes a significant part of like why these things lose steam, right? And so the second critical habit that I mentioned of big bet legends is they maintain velocity. So they allocate teams, small teams, but they allocate teams full time to these initiatives. They make sure that they have true leadership on that team, not a underpowered project manager, but a true leader on it that knows how to get things done, not just within the company, but across the channels and across the ecosystems that we work on there. High judgment, senior leader, fully committed to this. Well, these are the things that help maintain velocity. And so one of our chapters, the book is broken into 3 sections: big bet thinking, big bet environment, and big bet management. Big bet environment starts with a chapter called opening moves. And it's all of these predictable things that happen in companies that we know slow down projects. And they're useful for an operating scaled situation, but they work against when we need to be fast and nimble and testing. These are like policies and budget allocations and committees and technical environments that we have. And so you can predict that these things are going to hit your big bet. You can deal with them up front. You can be proactive on them so that everybody understands, like, yeah, those are the right things for other situations, but a big bet is different. We need to have a different environment for it. That's why the section's called Big Bet Environment. We need to have a different environment for it so that we can help maintain velocity relative to it. And so your premise is absolutely right. The other thing I would say about the example you gave is that too often on this kind of accuracy orientation, What people don't recognize is what the true risk of a new concept is. And so they work to get a new product, a new service, a new capability to 100%, and then they go to market. Well, really, the go to market acceptance, well, that's the real risk in it. The third critical habit is accelerate risk and value, deferring as much of the hard work until you've proven those things out. Well, how do I flip the script in how I build something so that I test the market reaction early, deferring having to build the perfection through all of that stuff until the end? After 18 months, then I finally get to market, and that's when I get the real test, right? And so there's a number of ways of testing market oriented, customer acquisition costs or pricing or actual customer feedback on features. There's a bunch of things we can do that most companies are uncreative and undisciplined in doing to actually bring those real risk points forward. And that then de-risks it so that then we can actually invest with confidence relative to now. It's no longer a bet. Now it's just a program. And I know that if I execute well, I've got the market there ready to go.
Yeah. One of the classic movie lines that has corrupted business thinking for a long time is if you build it, they will come. And I have seen millions of dollars go into those kind of initiatives only to fail miserably on arrival because they did not do the market testing that, they should have done.
Yeah. We wrote this book for two purposes. One, we wrote it for the company, right? Because these non-incremental, bold moves are needed by organizations to compete, and especially in the age of AI and digital capabilities. Like, you need to know as a company, like how are you creating non-incremental moves to create the next durable business? But we also wrote this book for the senior leaders who have to lead these transformations, because there's nothing better for your career than to be tied to one of these rocket ships that works. But there's also nothing riskier for your career than to have the concrete boots on of a big bet, a market entry like you're talking about that doesn't work. And so these are high risks, not just for the company, but for the people who are involved in them. And so all of this construct is needed to make it a safe endeavor for both the company and the individual. You have to be bold, but that doesn't mean you have to play a game that has rigged stakes against you. You can be the shark at the table and rig the game so that you succeed. And big bet leadership is the playbook to help a senior leader do that.
That's amazing. And as you were saying all that, I couldn't help but recall a couple of scenarios I've been with some of my national brand clients, and I'm not going to name names, but it applies across several industry segments where the business has large, high-value asset properties, and they rotate managers and promote people up and move people around. But when a new guy gets assigned to take on one of these assets, the first instruction it's stated various ways, but it translates into don't screw it up. In other words, the asset is operating. It's churning money by the minute. And so, yeah, you on one hand, if you're at the board level, you look at that and say, yeah, don't screw that up. It's making money by the minute. But when you somehow get locked into that mindset in the leadership realm of don't screw it up, the first time somebody proposes a risk-based opportunity to you, what are you going to say? No, don't think so. I'm not going to risk my chips on the table for this one.
So portfolio management, which is essentially how do we look to optimize and allocate our resources, is a very important job for senior leadership and for boards to do in companies. And one of the things you see from sustainable brands over a long period of time is they're very disciplined about ensuring that they're putting enough resources towards new business versus just optimizing the current business. And so there's a lot of different models and research on this, and there's a generalized model of kind of 70, 20, 10. 70% of your resources go to operating current business. 20% should go to incremental projects and investments. 10% to, these types of next horizon big bet transformations. That's a generalized portfolio. Your situation can dramatically different relative to that. But the important thing is to understand what your portfolio is and to have that senior leadership discussion. I think the riskiest position of all for companies is to not have any portfolio of kind of like, well, what's the next business here, and everything, right? That is the riskiest business of all. And that's essentially short-termism versus, the game that Amazon plays. It's all about the long term and everything, right? And Jeff's been signaling that since his 1997 shareholder letter, and his budget and his allocations show the disciplines around that, and they're willing to suffer being misunderstood, and they're willing to suffer having failed big bets that don't work out. But they're always keeping their calipers pretty high. Like, they don't let those big bets get out of the realm of what affordable learnings can be, and they only lean into something when it's really proven out. And that's the disciplines of big bet legends.
I like that, and I like that allocation idea, and I know in a lot of places that is traditionally called a research and development budget. But I like the idea of broadening that lens a little bit. It's not so much necessarily the tactile development of a product or a service, right, but it's looking at the market and exploring those opportunities that may emerge.
Oftentimes, a really good index for this is something around like a vitality index, right? Pharmaceutical companies are very good at understanding their vitality index. So a vitality index measures the percent of revenue that comes from either new customers, new products, new geographies versus your traditional products, customers, or geographies. And so if at a senior leadership level, we have an eye on that vitality index, and we actually put incentives in place to ensure that both the board and the senior leadership team are committed to an appropriate vitality index. Something like 25% tends to be a really good mark, that 25% of my business comes from new customers, new products, or new geographies that are, 3 years or less, or maybe 5 years or less. Well, that forces us to be disciplined about, like, okay, I need to be launching new services. I need to be having new customers. I need to be launching new geographies. And that helps build this durable base of business. And so R&D in the right situation can be a good leading indicator for creating that, but a shorter in indicator that still helps us keep our eye on creating the next horizon business is something around a vitality index.
I like that. And actually, for me, that's a new term I had not heard described that way. So, just curiosity, is that in the book in the environment section, or?
Yeah, that's around kind of incentives and ensuring that, and again, we wrote this book for senior leaders and the teams that serve senior leaders. You better understand the incentives of both the board and the senior leadership team when it comes to these big bets, because everybody needs to be committed to these things, not just the senior leader or the single threaded leader that's leading it. Like, the entire executive team and board has to be committed and highly attentive, and not just kind of hands off and kind of looking at it through the sidelines of like, well, yeah, they can go do that, but I'm running my business. Like, no. None of these big bets all impact every aspect of business. Like, that's a pretty common theme. And so even though a senior leader may not have big commitments today relative to it, they better be preparing themselves, their organizations for the change that's coming, because all of these things tend to change everything within a company.
Yeah. Well, and you touched on a really sensitive nerve there for probably a lot of guys and anybody that's approached the senior level. There is so much that is driven by the compensation package that's declared, and it becomes almost a defensive mindset when a new idea is floated to the executive whose whole bonus package is tied to ongoing operation of something, 'cause his answer is going to be, I don't have time for that. I'm done, but what he's really saying is, I'm not going to risk missing my mark so that I get my bonus.
Well, they're doing the completely sane thing, which is, what gets measured gets managed. You're telling me what's getting measured and incented is this. Guess what I'm going to pay attention to and everything, right?
Yeah.
That's why you really have to look at the incentives of the entire executive team and the board to make sure that there's overweighted attention and priority put on, like, being a good steward of the business, right? Creating the next durable horizon for the business. Because if you don't believe me, change is really coming for, I think, every industry. And the big change, and this is, again, back to the preface of the book about the hyper digital era, the past 25 years, like, we've really changed the customer experience. We've changed good expectations of products, services, new business models. But what really hasn't changed too much is productivity within a company, right? Like, productivity has been on a slow, gentle increase. What's going to change in this hyper digital era is that there will be a factor of 10 to 100x level of productivity within companies. And so those companies that learn how to harness AI and other disruptive technologies to create a level of productivity within organizations are going to have a distinct material advantage over companies who don't. And that is going to impact every industry and every sector of ours. It has to, because of our population aging, because of our debt as a country, because of these technologies, and because of a confident playbook that investors and tech companies have, like, oh, I know how to invest in companies that are committed to this type of change. And so, again, like, don't wait until the change is upon you. You need to play the game early. And we have this term of kind of, being a big bet shark. Like, you want to be the shark at the table here. And so our final piece of advice in the book is to be an active skeptic. So active meaning, like, you allocate the appropriate amount of resources to build these next horizon in your business. Skeptic means you test it before you commit to it, right? You have to be an active skeptic. That's the job to do for senior leadership. Everybody grew up as a really good operator. That's not enough anymore. You have to be a change leader.
I love it. And John, on that note, I think that's a great exclamation point to put on this, and we're going to wrap up the show. But first, I want to ask, how can folks get a hold of you if they're interested in knowing more?
Yeah, so johnrossman.com, bigbetleadership.com, LinkedIn. John Rossman is probably the easiest way, and I do welcome people. And anytime you have a question or want to talk about something, I'm happy and available.
Awesome. Well, that's great. And one last time, thank you so much. This is really insightful and a big challenge. So, folks, the gauntlet has been laid. You need to think about this brave new world that we're going into. So, John, thanks.
Doug, nice meeting you. Thank you.
You bet. Well, folks, with that, I do want to remind you that we have a video version of this over on LinkedIn on YouTube. I'm sorry. I got LinkedIn on the brain. You actually can get it. It's real circuitous going through LinkedIn, but you can do it. But anyway, the YouTube, same channel, Leadership Powered by Common Sense, got the whole video archive over there. So hop over, take a look, and give us a comment. Let us know if you've got an idea for another topic or another guest you'd like to hear from. But for now, I'm going to say goodbye. Go out there and make it a great day.
You've been listening to Leadership Powered by Common Sense, hosted by Doug Thorpe. If you would like to know more about the coaching and advisory services he provides, visit dougthorpe.com.